The lone rancher had lived so long with the wind that it felt like the only thing that truly knew him. His name was Thomas Hale, and his ranch sat on the ragged edge of the territory, where grass thinned into red dust and the sky stretched wide and merciless. Days passed with little more than the creak of leather, the low sound of cattle, and the distant cry of hawks. Thomas preferred it that way. Silence asked no questions and demanded no answers. People, on the other hand, always wanted something: land, water, obedience, blood. Late one evening, while the sun bled into the hills, Thomas was repairing a fence torn down by a recent storm. His hands worked from habit, twisting wire and setting posts, when he sensed movement behind him. He turned, half expecting a stray calf or a coyote. But instead he saw a girl standing at the edge of the arroyo. She was Apache, unmistakably so, her dark hair braided neatly, her buckskin dress worn but clean. She couldn't have been more than 17. Yet her eyes held a calm that unsettled him. She watched him work without speaking, as if the land itself had given her permission to stand there. Thomas cleared his throat, unsure whether to tell her to leave or ask if she needed help. Before he could decide, she spoke, her voice soft but steady. "If you want to, just do it," she said, nodding toward the broken fence. The words struck him as strange, almost foolish, yet they carried a weight that made him pause. He frowned, irritation rising. He didn't need advice from a girl who appeared out of nowhere. Still, he bent back to his work, driving the final staple into the post. When he finished, he wiped his hands on his trousers and looked up. She was still there, studying him as if she had learned something important. "This land listens," she said quietly. "Every step. Every choice." She crouched and pressed her fingers into the damp soil, shaping a simple mark that resembled an arrowhead. "So does mine." Thomas felt a chill crawl up his spine. He opened his mouth to ask her name, her reason for being there, but the questions died unspoken. She rose, gave him one last look, neither friendly nor hostile, and walked away into the fading light. Within moments she was gone, swallowed by the brush as if she had never existed at all. That night the coyotes did not howl. The cattle stood unusually calm, clustered near the creek. Thomas lay awake, staring at the ceiling, the girl's words repeating in his mind. "If you want to, just do it." He didn't know what he wanted anymore: peace, survival, forgiveness. But he sensed that something had shifted. The fence was fixed, yet a different boundary had been touched. One far older and far more dangerous than wire and wood. 2 days after the mysterious girl had vanished into the dust, the sky darkened with heavy clouds that rolled over the hills like a promise. Rain fell suddenly, drenching the ranch and turning the parched earth into a slick mess. Thomas Hale had never welcomed storms. They tore at his fences, muddied the waterholes, and scattered his cattle. But today he sensed a purpose in the downpour. As he struggled along the creek, checking the water channels, he spotted her again. The Apache girl stood at the edge of the water, her dress clinging to her, her hair damp, and her eyes reflecting the gray light of the storm. There was no greeting, no hesitation. She simply raised a hand and pointed to a large stone marking the boundary of his water rights, a stone that had shifted during the last storm. Thomas approached cautiously. He had learned from hard experience that appearances in the West were often misleading. "What do you want?" he asked, though he already felt he might not like the answer. She tilted her head, eyes studying him carefully, as though weighing whether he was worthy of understanding. "Storms move things," she said softly, her voice carrying over the hiss of rain. "People do too." He glanced at the marker stone and then back at her. He had known disputes over water could lead to violence, lawsuits, even bloodshed. But there was something in her tone that carried no threat, only a quiet expectation. The unthinkable idea began to form in his mind. He could fight for every inch, claim every drop, enforce his rights like the law demanded. Or he could step aside and do what his heart whispered, but his mind feared the impossible to share. He reached down, gripping the stone, feeling its weight, feeling the weight of history pressing against his hands. Slowly, deliberately, he rolled it upstream to where the creek divided, creating a fair boundary between his land and the neighboring tribal lands. The girl watched silently, her eyes never leaving his hands. When he was done, she nodded once. "If you want peace," she said, "just do it." That night there was no fire, no sound of hooves approaching, only the gentle patter of rain on the roof. By morning, riders arrived not to threaten but to talk. 3 elders of the Apache came, their expressions serious but calm. They sat by the fire, water dripping from their clothing, and listened as Thomas explained his choice. He spoke of the storm, the shifting stone, and the decision to act beyond law and custom, driven instead by respect and fairness. The elders nodded, their eyes revealing approval where words could not. One finally said, "You chose the hard path." Thomas shrugged, knowing he had chosen the only one he could live with. "I did what I had to," he replied. By mid-morning, an understanding was in place. The land was shared, the creek was divided, and a fragile but genuine trust had been built. When the girl appeared once more, she did not smile, but her gaze carried satisfaction. Spring arrived slowly on Thomas Hale's ranch, stretching the land from the dull browns of winter into the soft greens of new grass. The creek ran full and clear, winding between the hills like a silver ribbon, and the cattle grazed peacefully in pastures that had once been divided by fear and suspicion. Thomas rode each morning along the ridges, checking fences, mending gates, and watching the land respond to the care it had long been denied. The memory of the Apache girl's words lingered in his mind, a quiet reminder that courage and action often demanded more than strength or gunfire. They required trust, patience, and the willingness to stand for what was right, even when it was hardest. The girl appeared less frequently now, as if her presence had been a lesson rather than a companionship. When she did come, she was like a ghost of the land itself, emerging from the brush with the same calm assurance she had shown in those first days. One afternoon, as Thomas repaired a broken fence along the shared creek, she appeared on the opposite bank, her eyes fixed on him. There was no need for words. Her presence alone reminded him that the choices he had made were not just about water, cattle, or property. They were about the life he wanted to live and the kind of man he wanted to be. Thomas continued his work, glancing up from time to time, feeling a rare sense of peace. Trouble, however, had a way of testing even the most careful decisions. A band of outlaws had learned of the fragile understanding between the ranchers and the Apache, hoping to exploit division for their own gain. One late afternoon, they rode into the valley, brandishing weapons and shouting demands. Thomas knew confrontation could lead to bloodshed, but he also knew that yielding to fear would undo all he and the neighbors had built. He dismounted, leaving his rifle slung behind him, and stepped into the center of the path. His voice was calm but firm, carrying across the valley. He spoke of land, water, trust, and the shared hardships that had brought them together. The outlaws paused, their confidence faltering under the weight of his conviction. One by one, they turned their horses and left, unable to find a foothold in a place stitched together by understanding rather than fear. That evening, as the sun dipped behind the hills, the girl returned to the ridge overlooking the ranch. She stood silently beside him, watching the cattle move like shadows across the pastures. "You did it," she said softly, her voice a rare mix of approval and quiet pride. "You wanted a future. You chose it," Thomas nodded, feeling the satisfaction of a lesson learned the hardest way. Wanting something was meaningless without the courage to act rightly. As the girl disappeared into the dusk, fading into the horizon like a wisp of wind over the hills, Thomas felt a deep sense of belonging. He was still a lone rancher in name, yet he had become part of something larger, an unspoken promise, a shared trust.